Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Omnia Performance Podcast with myself, Fergus Crawley, and
myself, Big Johnny Payne.
Today we're going to break down week 8 of our strength and full distance triathlon program as a way of contextualizing how we consider approaching those two things, strength and full distance triathlon, or Ironman, don't say us please, and I mean in general terms triathlon. So what are the considerations that we look for when it comes to balancing top end strength performance with triathlon? There's a lot of things at play. There's the age-old, why would you choose to be average at many sports rather than good at one, often spoken by people that are average at one sport, and we like to just broaden horizons by taking on a rather inconvenient amount of things all at once. So let's try and make some sense of that today, but before we do that, it doesn't make sense as to why you wouldn't have already hit follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, why you haven't shared this episode or an episode previously with a friend, and why you haven't checked us out on YouTube. And most importantly, there is a gift for you in the show notes down below. And if you're watching on YouTube, it's in the description. No, you don't need a gift. You made the gift. There is a sample week PDF available in a link in the description down below that you can download and review to give a bit more context on everything we are discussing today, with session details in there, etc., etc. We'll be a bit more vague today rather than going rep by rep, set by set, but more talk about the sort of overarching considerations that underpin week 8 of our strength and full distance Ironman triathlon training plan. So, Johnny, to set the scene, what are the challenges at play when it comes to balancing strength and triathlon in simple terms?
Key considerations are strength and triathlon, essentially. We're looking at trying to understand how we can put together all the different modalities that make up the sport of triathlon and maintain, if not grow, well, whilst we grow in terms of strength, whilst we push forward at that discipline. So really, we're going to have to look at how we piece these together, and I guess that's what we're going to take people through with this week 8. It's worth saying that there are 7 weeks that have led up to this, but the structure is very much the same across the board, in the sense that we are trying to manage all these different stressors within one continuous microcycle, which is what we've got here with week 8, and do it so that we are optimizing recovery and so that we're able to progress across the board.
And as we always say, finding the minimum effective dose for the maximum effective return, rather than just doing what a lot of people on the internet think hybrid training is, which is just chucking loads of shit at the wall and hoping it sticks, and then 12 weeks later realizing that they've torn something or they feel destroyed and confused as to where it all went wrong.
Well, that is the key, is that you've got, if we consider, okay, so I want to maintain, if not grow my strength, I want to move forward with that. So my program to this point has been the Cube or 531 or whatever people are doing these days. I'm mentioning sort of old programs.
I think 531 is still very popular, to be fair. Yeah, it's a solid program.
It's a bloody good program.
Boring,
that'd be why,
in my opinion.
Well, good programs often are.
Yeah.
So rather than what we've got are people that may be following some kind of strength-driven program at the moment, who also want to do triathlons. Let's start from that end. The throwing shit at the wall and hoping things stick thing does actually apply, because what happens then is like, well, where can I do my cycling? Oh, well, I'll do it here, because that's the day that I've got access to a bike. When am I going to do swimming? Saturday's a good day to go to the pool because it's a bit of a drive. And it all becomes a little bit kind of randomized, and really there's no consideration given to how to put these things together without actually just sort of overwhelming the system, overwhelming your schedule, and overwhelming your body essentially, and failing.
As we discussed in the Strength and Marathon discussion, intentional programming is the key to success in this game being, quote unquote, hybrid training or concurrent training at different ends of the spectrum where there's conflict in terms of adaptation, and high endurance aerobic demand triathlon across a variety of skills, plus top end force production in a reduced amount of skills, but still worth mentioning skill. Squatting is a skill. It's a simpler skill than swimming in many ways in terms of technical proficiency, depending on how long you've been doing it. But again, it's something that efficiency, movement patterns, manipulating biomechanics, understanding weaknesses, understanding strengths is very useful for the individual. So this...
Well, if you want to get better at it, you want to get better.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. The same applies across the board with all these things, doesn't it? So
this week that we'll break down just now, superficially, first of all, We'll explain why it might be a little bit less volume than people would expect across all of the individual disciplines, because I think that's the first important consideration, is that less can well be more, because we only have so much energy to give to training on a week-by-week, day-by-day basis. I'm sure there's no one listening that's a professional triathlete, in which case, obviously, this stuff isn't going to apply to you as much. But for most people that have recreational hobbies, like lifting and triathlon training, or they're trying to factor this around family, work, business ownership, whatever it might be.
Real life.
You can't just double day every day and just go, oh, well, I'm just going to do a 6-hour bike ride on a Wednesday because that'll be fun. We need to find what works to move people forwards whilst trying to make progress, or at the very least maintain in the disciplines that they want to focus on. Does that mean that your Ironman performance will be as best were you just focusing on endurance training in and of itself? Probably not. But does it mean that you can continue to make progress towards your sort of genetic ceiling over the years by continually chipping away at this? Yes, but it all comes down to where you compromise, what you sacrifice. Nobody, I mean, we've definitely never said that hybrid training is superseding the sort of law of specialization, but it is a willing compromise to accept that you are going to spread yourself a little bit more thinly across a variety of disciplines and therefore make progress a little bit slower, but in doing so, satiate your desire to train across the things that you enjoy and make progress in that direction.
The other analogy that's often used, or analogies that are often used with training is when people say, oh, if you think about this as a car, and you think about this as you want to get, you want to have a full engine, or you want to be able to fuel your tank, or you want this, that, and the next thing. It's a good way to frame things, is that what we're looking at here is the vehicle that we want to get us from our starting point to a successful strength and triathlon outcome, as in both those things have moved forward. You finish a programming block or a phase or an entire program, your strength has gone up and your ability to perform as a triathlete has progressed. That's what we want for everybody. That's what everybody should want from a program. You don't want to go backwards in one. Is that we want to consider what the vehicle to get there is. So if we consider that at the moment we've got, I don't know, let's name a Ford Escort, and we want to get from A to B. So A is the start point, B is the end point, obviously. We can look in that car and we can say, okay, so this car is strength and triathlon. We're trying to do all these things, but we need to get from the start point to the finish point in the most efficient manner possible. So the first thing to do would be to say, how much of this stuff in this car do we really need? Now, you could argue that in order to have a really very comfortable and lovely journey and all the rest of it, it's great to have the stereo in there. It's lovely to have air conditioning. But are you traveling on your own? Do you really need 5 seats? All this kind of stuff. So what we're talking about when we talk about kind of not so much compromising, but efficiently and intelligently reducing all the fluff, all the extra stuff that's in the program, all the garnish, to mix my metaphors. We want to try and remove all the things that are going to slow that process down. And some of those things in another program would be necessary. Some of those things might be fundamental to the programming. But when we're putting these things together, we say, do we really need X? Do we really need Y? So junk volume is one example. Excessive or an overplay of accessory work would be another example. And we kind of say, what can we shave off? What can we remove? What can we take out of that Escort? It was a Ford Escort, wasn't it? Yeah. What can we remove from that Ford Escort in order to make it more efficient, lighter, able to continue through the journey? Everything needs to be in place for that car to remain functionally useful. But do we need all the fluff and the extra bits? And that's the trick. That's what we've done with the programming. That's how we've built it, is to say what is superfluous here, what is over excessive, what actually only would suit a full strength program, what only would suit a full triathlon program, and where's the crossover. So hopefully we get to point B in our Ford Escort, having had a comfortable journey, having achieved everything we want to do, but not necessarily with all the fluff and trim and fanciness that we might have started it with. Make sense?
Yep. I feel like there was probably a more concise way of rounding that off, but yeah, there we are. Anyone into Johnny Payne analogies will be very, very pleased right now. So Monday, lower body, AM, turbo trainer, PM. Tuesday, upper body, AM, swim, PM. Key detail here. These are the lower rep, higher strength, dominant strength sessions earlier in the week. And these are the higher intensity, focused skill sessions earlier in the week in the triathlon disciplines. And that is to consolidate stressors, which we have spoken about before and we will touch on here.
Yeah.
Wednesday, fartlek run, which is varied pacing in a sort of aerobic to anaerobic range. Thursday, volume swim, which is essentially building a more steady state aerobic swim focus, whilst also having some, I guess, focused work in there with it being 500 meter sets in this instance. Mm-hmm. But as the program develops, that will just become 3K for time or something like that.
It does do, in fact, yeah.
So yeah, that's very much a more volume, reduced intensity focus session. Friday will be a full body session that's much higher rep, much more assistance focused, much less top end strength dominant, with some pre-fatigue work in there as well, ahead of long bike ride on Saturday, long run on Sunday. And some of you might be thinking, well, you guys always advocate for rest days on. Yes, but you're balancing effectively 4 different components here, which means that realistically, and I've seen this on Reddit, I've seen people criticize our programming because it becomes very demanding. Mm-hmm. Because it's as if they expect the combination of strength and triathlon training to somehow be easy and sociable and workable around.
You're still trying to do
certain things.
Triathlon, a full distance triathlon.
You can't execute progress in these two things. You can't you can't make progress in strength and triathlon goals concurrently by taking shortcuts. We have removed what we deem superfluous within the context of this programming and seen great results with it. But there's still going to be a lot of time and a lot of work required because it is a very time and volume dependent goal that you have chosen. So to anyone on Reddit that likes to think, oh well, they haven't found a way for me to do this in 6 hours a week, you need to create more time. You need to adjust your goals. Is all I'll say. That was just me last night scrolling, finding something.
Yeah, but you're right.
What are you talking about?
You're right. This does become a time demanding and an intensive program, but that's because the choice is that somebody is wanting to complete a full distance triathlon, and by its very nature, even if you didn't have the concurrent goal of gaining strength and continuing your strength journey, that's going to be a tough ask.
Yeah.
You know, anybody who has done one or has approached one will know that as you get to the pointy end of the stick here, you are consuming more time. It's that's the very nature of it. It's called an Ironman for a reason. People want to look into the history of it. It's amazing how it even came about. Brilliant stories. We won't go into that now either, but dig deep. To your recovery point though, and you've touched on it a little bit as you described the week, is that we have designed the program in a manner so that recovery is still optimized. So although it's a very full program, and we're looking in this particular instance, week 8, that's a 7-day a week demand and commitment. Each session is designed, and the methodology is designed, and the whole setup of that particular microcycle is designed so that the recovery is optimal. Now that might seem counterintuitive.
Is the key question.
Yeah, and I guess we touched on that at the beginning, is that we're doing so much that to throw all the shit at the wall and hope something sticks is just not entirely intelligent. It's scientifically lacking. And really what we're trying to do here is to look at all these different energy systems, and you mentioned consolidation of stresses a minute ago, and understand what the overall effect, what the demand on the body is, what the physiological demand, and what the adaptive requirements would be. And if we look at intensity and volume as our driver for that and say, or let's start that again. If we look at energy systems as our understanding of what is actually happening physiologically, then we can try and separate things out into kind of stressor functions. So at the beginning of the week, as you said a moment ago, we have high intensity, lower volume work, and that's regardless of the modality. So the strength work is high intensity, low volume. The what we've got at the beginning of the week, turbo. The turbo session, which is a bike session for anybody who doesn't know, is high intensity, low volume in comparison to the rest of the week. The ultimate demand of a triathlon is high volume and rotating intensity, if you like, isn't it? But the intensity is relatively high if you want to do well. So we're trying to develop these different energy systems, and if we can develop them or stress them in a certain amount of isolation from each other, then we're going to allow each one of those energy systems to recover without being swamped. So the high intensity work at the beginning of the week, we've got kind of more medium intensity, I suppose you could say, or the threshold work, the kind of glycotic lactate driven work in the middle of the week. And we've got the high aerobic demand, which is high volume and low intensity towards the end of the week, which means we're separating out those different energy systems from each other. Meaning that if you look at the end of the week where we've got an endurance bike ride, your eyes are better than mine. What have we got on that particular week time-wise? That's a long bike ride. We've got 5 hours or so of work towards the end of the week.
Over the weekend, yeah. Saturday,
over the
Sunday.
weekend, yeah, in low intensity, steady state aerobic work. If we were to have taken that and drawn it out over the course of the week, then your opportunities to recover from that aerobic demand is less, because you keep coming back to the well over and over to try and drink. So we're hoping to separate these things out to consolidate those stresses, meaning that by the time you then come to do the aerobic work again, now you could get pernickety about this, but essentially by the time we come to focus on aerobic work again, you've gone almost 5 to 6 days.
Your mana bar has replenished somewhat in that specific energy system. However, it is not hit the top of the spectrum again.
Right.
Essentially, fatigue will accumulate. Your sort of threshold on your mana bar will continually drop down until you hit a peak week, and then you taper to try and replenish it back up to its full store so that you can then execute a race. Yeah. And you do the same thing with strength, because as fatigue accumulates, your fatigue will increase, and fatigue masks fitness, which means that there might be, with this sort of training especially, I've experienced this myself, there might be, even with FTP, things like that, there will be a cumulative fatigue effect, making it seem as if you are getting weaker or less powerful.
Yeah.
When in reality, your true fitness has just not yet revealed itself, because you're carrying the fatigue, which is preventing that from being
expression of that power.
Especially with things like heavy squats and heavy deadlifts, because it's people are under the impression they're getting weaker whilst training, but actually they are becoming more efficient operating under fatigue. And whilst the weight on the bar might not feel as good as you'd expect it to were you just doing a strength training program, that's because you are carrying fatigue from the total opposing end of the spectrum, which you need to get comfortable with, so that when you taper off, you maybe reduce your triathlon training volume and then do a YOLO deadlift 2 weeks after your triathlon. You might think, oh, actually, 180 felt way better today in this warm-up set than it did 4 weeks ago when I was under loads of fatigue. And 200s moved really well. This is interesting. I haven't got weaker. I was just tired.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing to consider. And that's why so many people give up after not long at all when trying to balance these things, especially if they're just chucking shit at the wall, because there's no intention to the programming, which means you're going to spike fatigue much quicker. It'll create the perception that you're not making any progress, that you're going backwards, and then you go back to the drawing board and choose one singular discipline.
Yeah. The other, and we should probably be less facetious, which is my go-to usually, as we know, but in the sense that we're saying that chucking shit at the wall, because there is a logic to people's approach, I think, that is just a little bit skewed, and maybe a little bit deeper analysis would maybe bring them to where we've arrived ourselves, which is that what you normally see in any kind of programming, strength programming or endurance programming, is kind of an undulation of stress. So you would have a heavy or a hard day. You could apply this to either side of that spectrum. A heavy or a hard day on a Monday, then you ease off a bit on the Tuesday. Then you're going to have a heavy or hard day because you've had that slightly more recovery-based day on the Tuesday. You're going to have a heavy or hard day on the Wednesday, ease off a bit on the Thursday, heavy or hard day on the Friday, and it kind of in, out. The idea being that each subsequent day becomes the recovery day for the previous. But the problem is with the physiological adaptation required for something like a heavy, I get a bit sciencey here, for apologies to people who can't be arsed with this, but for a heavy phosphocreatine driven day, like a high intensity, low volume day where you're producing a huge amount of force in a short period of time, to recover from that isn't going to take 48 hours. It's going to take a good bit more than that. So we're consolidating those stress so that all your high intensity work happens within a short time frame. And then over the rest of the week, you're having the opportunity systemically to recover from that stress whilst you attend to other things that aren't stressing the same system. So you end up with a bigger bang. And the other thing that's we don't talk about much with this is if you think about having a low intensity, high volume weekend, the 5 hours worth of bike and then run that we've got in week 8 here, what would be the best recovery modality for that? Well, two options you've got is if you've done 5 hours worth of work over the weekend, rest would be a good bloody option. But the longer we rest, the less opportunity we're having to add adaptive quality to the programming. So getting in, and we often do this just as a recovery process for people, getting in after a long run and doing 3 heavy sets on a squat is an excellent recovery protocol for aerobic work. Because essentially you're doing a full body, full range of motion stretch, and you're allowing the muscles to open up without actually occluding them full of blood and without kind of stressing them aerobically. The flip side applies is that if we do heavy sets in squat again to keep that alive, if we squat over and over and over again, very heavily high intensity, one of the best modalities for recovery would be low intensity, steady state work. So the way we've set the week up is that each subsequent part of that programming over the course of a microcycle acts as the best next stressor in terms of recovery. So aerobic work is great recovery for high volume, for high intensity work. So we've got them separated out so that allows recovery to happen. It seems a bit complex, but essentially that
I think the real
consolidation of stresses is ultimately what we're trying to do. Is say what stresses the most this way. Okay, let's apply that in one example. What stresses the most this way? Let's apply that, and we've put it together in a manner where the optimized recovery is key.
The real key summary, I think, is that you can't rely on the principles of effective triathlon training in general terms if you are also incorporating strength training. You can't rely on the standardized progressive principles of strength training if you're also incorporating triathlon training. That doesn't mean that they go out the window, but it means that you can't go on a forum online and see that you must be doing X amount of swims, X amount of bikes, and X amount of runs per week at this point when you're this many weeks out, because you are accounting for the fatigue from the strength training as well, which I think leads on to the next important consideration, which is people saying, oh, well, there's only 2 swims, 2 bikes, and 2 runs in this week. Is that enough to training for a full distance triathlon? And I think in general terms, we've obviously had to build this training plan around sort of the sort of general approach. But it's important for individuals that are trying to balance this to assess where they're strong and where they're weak, where they have more work to do, where they have less work to do. If you go on the internet and you go searching for what should the ideal Ironman training week look like, you've got 3 sports to balance. In our case, we've got 4. If you've got 3 sports to balance, you're likely going to be better. There's going to be a tiering system as to which you're best at. Yeah. Swimming is the thing that often puts people off the most, but it's the least volume dependent in terms of time commitment throughout a training plan, which means you might be able to rely on frequency a little bit more. But if you're like Lucy Charles Barkley and you come from a world-class swimming background, you probably don't need to be in the pool any more than a couple of days a week just to be able to maintain what you've got. In the same vein, if you are coming from a road cycling background and you're not confident in the pool and you haven't done much running, then it's probably worth readjusting your week around that rather than arbitrarily hitting, oh, I need to do 3 bike rides a week, I need to cover this much mileage, I need to cover this much volume, because that is eating into the time and energy availability that you have to focus on the things that you can bring up your overall performance with. And that's why minimum effective dose for maximum effective return is the sort of principle that underpins how we balance all sporting disciplines. And I think there are some definite things from a confidence and B physiological point of view that I think it's worth hitting in your training before a full distance triathlon. I think a 100-mile ride is essential so that you know what that feels like.
Yeah, we put kind of prerequisites in actual fact, don't we, when we suggest people do this and say, listen, before you arrive at this intensity of this program, here's where we would expect you to be just in terms of overall capacity. I guess that's no different to somebody saying, I want to do a 200 kilo squat, and they say, okay, have you got 170 and what's your timeline? Yeah. Say, well, I've only got 80 kilo squat. You're like, well, okay, we're looking at a very different programming structure here. So yeah, we expect people to arrive at a certain capability. But I guess the people who are saying, I want to do a full distance triathlon and I want to continue to progress my strength work aren't people who have just discovered the gym.
Yeah, you'd like to think so anyway, but there does seem to be
steer them in the right direction.
There does seem to be a bit of a desire to sort of cheat code your way to the end goal here, but a goal like this does require a very specific amount of time commitment and work commitment week to week. However, maybe it's a great place to start with a sprint triathlon. Climb the greasy pole of triathlon, sprint Olympics 70.3.
Yep.
Iron distance, and then if you want to be an absolute moron like some people, I don't know, you can do a double iron distance if you choose to lose your mind over a steadily progressive number of years and find yourself speaking to a guy called Jonny Payne in a podcast studio in the very much here and now. But I think
many people.
Yeah, this is not a niche discussion at all. In terms of rounding this all together, I think we've obviously been biased in looking at the way that we do things, but I think it's important to reinforce that we've had a lot of positive results by looking at things this way for people. I think the key thing to underline at this point is that this is a recreational set of goals. There's no triathlon and strength leagues out there. So people are doing this for themselves. They're doing it because it's things that they enjoy. And that does mean that if you want to go sub 10 as quickly as you possibly can, then it might be wise to let your strength training take the back seat for however long. However, if you're somebody that's worked for many, many years to build muscle mass, build strength, and you want to hold on to that, then getting this right is very important because it allows you to make progress towards the new goal whilst holding on to the hard work or developing the hard work that you've built over a number of years. And again, from a research perspective, we know how little volume you need to maintain strength and muscle mass that you've already built versus building it. And that's where this becomes really important, because there's so many cynical triathletes, endurance athletes out there. And I don't mean to point fingers. It just disheartens me at how many people in their little box like to shout out of their box at other people's box and go, oh, it's stupid because of this, when the person in the other box is just wanting to have a good time and to utilise their enjoyment. You hit the nail on the head there.
What's interesting to me is we get a lot of, well, I say a lot, it's what floats to the top, isn't it? Because it's social media, it's the internet, it's Reddit, etc. But there are comments that are kind of quite negative. It's not so much about us, it's about, well, why wouldn't you want to do it properly? If you're going to do a full distance triathlon, why don't you just do that and never, and you're like, well, because... And this is what we get with the one-to-one coaching as almost entirely. I mean, we have some people doing some very specialist things who have some crazy goals and whatnot, but the vast majority of people say, using this as an example, okay, what are your goals, Fergus? Well, I really, really love strength training. I really love shifting tin or, lifting weight. I've worked for years. I've got some strength goals that I want to continue on. But my friend Johnny's done 3 triathlons now, and he just seems to have a blast. And I've been and helped him on a couple, and it just looks like it looks like something that would be a real challenge. I don't want to give up my strength training. Can I do both these things? And I've never once said, do you really want to win this thing?
Yeah.
It's never happened. Yeah. It's what I'm hearing is I want to do fun things. I'm excited to continue my strength journey. I love training, which I do, which you do. Used us as examples for a good reason. But I'm bang up for getting some mad Lycra on and cycling about a hill. Great, we can help, and here's probably a nice roadmap. Here's our Ford Escort stripped down. This is what we think we're going to be able to do for you in order to help you achieve that with the least friction possible and to keep both those goals moving forward. Nobody's suggesting we're producing, and we are in actual fact, that's a complete side note, but I was going to say nobody's going to suggest that we're trying to produce athletes who can qualify for Kona at the same time as winning the IPF. Like I say, that's not undoable, but it's not the usual. What we're saying is let's go out there and have some fun. But we can progress in both. We can make you better skilled. We can make you better qualified to do it. We can make the adaptions work better for you, and we can reduce that friction. Have at it.
And all I'll say is that often the people being most cynical about this aren't the ones winning.
No.
So let that be a reflection on them rather than what you're capable of. Because
it's a funny thing with triathlon as well, isn't it? Just whilst I think about it, is that somebody would say, well, why don't you just bump the strength stuff and do triathlon and just get better at it? It's fucking moronic that you're trying to, why do that? And he's like, well, the same argument could be had with triathlon itself, isn't it? Why do 3 modalities when you could just be a better runner? You're like, well, fuck off.
Yeah.
That's my response.
Yeah, and the runners that are often saying that are not the ones winning.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
It's always the middle of the pack. People have spent too much money for not enough results that are shouting the loudest outside of their box. And if you feel attacked right now, I'm not even remotely sorry, because your cynicism on the internet is preventing other people from having a good time. And ultimately, if you're training recreationally, that's really what this all boils down to, is having a good time, whether that's during the training itself or off pitch, so to speak, in your day-to-day life from a self-development point of view. So we love this balance. It is a tough balance to get right. It's
tough, but it's fun.
There's probably a separate discussion on hypertrophy and triathlon, because that is very difficult in terms of energy balancing overall.
I'd say possibly would be the toughest challenge from a programming perspective.
I'd say so.
Hypertrophy and triathlon. It's doable. We are doing it with people, but it's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, but I think in terms of general considerations, I appreciate that's been kind of a view through the lens of our programming only. We haven't had comparisons of things, but it's our podcast, so there you are. But hopefully that shares a few insights as to how we view things. I think just to summarize, this is week 8 of a 16-week training with a week of testing as well. Training plan, there is a sample week in the show notes or description down below. To summarize, lower body AM, turbo trainer PM on Monday, Tuesday, upper body AM, swim PM, Wednesday, fartlek run, Thursday, volume swim, Friday, full body, Saturday, endurance bike, Sunday, zone 2 run. That is how we have structured a sort of mid-training cycle week, and that is done with the intention and considerations that we've discussed today. There's obviously more things to consider, so any questions that you do have, please do reach out, comment them down below, and we'd be more than happy to develop the conversation. But I think to really summarize it down, you need to set clear goals in terms of what you want to achieve in strength and triathlon so that you've got parameters to work within. You need to assess your strengths and weaknesses to know where the work is to be done and where the work isn't to be done, more importantly, so you don't need to spend so much time on that. You need to do away with arbitrary forums telling you must be doing X or you must be doing Y, you must be doing Z, because they often don't take into the fact that you're also balancing strength training. You need to look at the movements and strength base that you've built up over the years to obviously being even considering something like this. And you need to then plan your assistance exercises and junk volume and all that sort of stuff around it. Don't just think that doing more and always being the hardest work in the room is going to get you very far here, because you're adding a whole different energy demand at the other end of the spectrum in. Sensible, intentional programming is what's going to make for sustainable progress. And after all, the most successful recreational athlete is the one that is the most sustainable over a long period of time. Nothing gets in the way like hitting the wall, being burnt out, being injured, snapping something, coming off your bike because you're falling asleep after such a big training week because you've decided that you're going to do a long bike ride in the morning, lift in the evening, then swim before you go to bed every day of the week because oorah, Goggins, bro. You're just gonna have a bad time.
Poor Goggins.
And
the ears must be burning.
Yeah, the final summary is triathlon is a skillful, dominant set of disciplines, and so is lifting. And if you add a variety of those together, you're gonna have to piece the puzzle together sensibly. Are you gonna make progress as quickly were you to sort of distill that down into individual disciplines? No, but triathletes already accept that compromise. We are now at the point where cycling wattage figures in triathlon are starting to knock on the door of pretty impressive cycling figures outside of triathlon as well. But that's taken many, many years and lots of technological advancement and whatnot. And obviously there's tri bikes and there's all these things going on, which means that the data is not entirely comparable. But if this is all about having a good time as a recreational athlete, then take those considerations on board. If you do want the training plan, then hopefully you know where to go. That should be made clear at this point. But if you just want a bit more of an understanding as to how this week is put together, what the individual components are, then download the PDF down below. Any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I have a call in 7 minutes time that I'm going to get to. So I think there's a few more things we could have gone into a little bit more detail on.
I'm going to talk for the next 9 minutes.
Oh, goodness. Why the extra 2 minutes?
To make you late for your call.
Oh, well, no, I'd just leave.
Oh, I see.
Because if I was still here, I could also talk. Why would you just talk for 9 minutes?
Didn't
think that through, did you, Mr. Ford Escort? Anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Foiling you is not going to work at all, so just say goodbye.
No. Any questions, just to reiterate, reach out to us, please, and hope that that's been interesting. Do let us know if there's any specific podcast topics or conversations you would like us to have, and we will endeavour to have them. And thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye.